From the Victory Studios in downtown Little Rock, this is Capitol View with your hosts, Roby Brock and David Goins.
Good Sunday morning to you. Welcome into Capitol View. I'm David Goins.
And I'm Roby Brock. Thanks for joining us. We are joined this morning by Congressman Rick Crawford. He represents Arkansas's 1st Congressional District. Thank you for being with us.
Hey, good to be with you.
Absolutely, the third of the 4th Arkansas Congressional delegation to join us, so we welcome you in this Sunday morning. Let's start with what's going on at the U.S. House, or maybe what's not happening at the U.S. House. Starting on immigration, this was something that at least the Senate thought could get done before the August recess. It appears obviously plain now that's not going to happen. What's your feel on what's happening in the House right now?
Well, our approach in the House has been to adopt a piecemeal approach and primarily being focused on border security, and I think that's going to be the general consensus among our conference, certainly. The Speaker has indicated publicly on numerous occasions that he's not going to bring the Senate bill to the floor. And the thing that concerns me about the Senate piece is that whenever we see this comprehensive approach, however well-intentioned it may be, I think that we tend to see things happen that unintended consequences. For example, the Affordable Care Act, it was kind of ramrodded through. It wasn't given good consideration with respect to hearings and debate and so on, and it's just a huge overarching piece of legislation. That's what we saw play out in the Senate. Whereas in the House, we want to make sure we're more interested in getting it right than we are in getting it by a specific date.
One of the hot topics this week, one of the hottest topics this week on immigration was Representative Steve King's comments from Iowa. I think we've got a graphic we can pull up here just to kind of quote a little bit about what he said. Referring to illegal immigrants, they aren't all valedictorians. They weren't all brought in by their parents. For every one who's a valedictorian, there's another 100 out there that weigh 130 pounds. They've got calves the size of cantaloupes because they're hauling 75 pounds of marijuana across the desert. Those people would be legalized with the same act, referring to the Senate Act there. What's your reaction to that comment? Does that help the immigration debate at all in Washington?
It doesn't. In fact, I mean, that's the kind of thing that we want to avoid, those kind of comments, and I certainly am disappointed that Steve King would make a comment like that, and certainly not pleased to hear that. It's not helpful to the process, and we need to avoid that kind of unnecessary and unwarranted type of language when we're dealing with this issue.
You've indicated that in the next week or two you'll be traveling to the Mexican border to take a look at some things. What do you expect to get from that trip?
Well, I've not been down there, and so Chairman of Homeland Security Mike McCall, who's from Texas, has arranged this visit from San Diego to Tucson to Harlingen, Texas. I'd just like to see for myself, firsthand assessment of really what's taking place down there and what assets we have and what resources are available, what we need to do different, and that should also help us to make our argument for border security and a little more basis in fact.
Do you think it could potentially change your argument for border security? Maybe not drastically, but how much do you expect to learn by going down there and then looking at something that you can research as it is right now?
Well, I think that talking with different agencies. Obviously, you've got Border Patrol, but one of the things that tends to be lost in this whole debate is, sheriffs. And the Border Sheriffs Association favors the House approach. In fact, Mike McCall has a great relationship with these border sheriffs, and they're really on the front lines. They're the ones that are dealing with this immigration issue on a day-to-day basis, and I think the approach that the House is taking sort of reflects their needs and their wishes. And if you look at the Senate approach where they say, well, we need 20,000 additional Border Patrol agents, they're not saying that. That's not what they don't believe they need that. What they think they need is enforcement mechanisms for local and county law enforcement, and they need to be able to patrol on all those lands. There are some federal lands that are prevented from being patrolled on for environmental sensitivity reasons, which is completely ridiculous. In the context of national security, I think we ought to be sensitive to the environment, but we ought to first be sensitive to the fact that we have very much a threat on our southern border, and not just from illegal immigration, but from terrorist activity. We know, and we've seen accounts of terror cells aggregating in northern Mexico, Hamas and Iranian-funded factions. We need to be diligent about border security, not just for immigration, but certainly from a national security perspective.
Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the farm bill that has, at least a piece of it has passed in the House now. You still have the whole SNAP program funding there. I've got a quote that you put out in one of your press releases after the second vote that did actually pass. "This is not a perfect bill, nor is this approach my first choice," was what your stated position was there. In the first combined farm bill, there would have been SNAP funding that would have been cut by about $20 billion over a 10-year period. Do you think you can get a better deal than that?
I honestly don't think we can. I think that we have to be careful that we don't overreach, and I think that's what we did in that first round, and we lost a lot of Democrat support. In fact, we had probably 40 to 50 commitments from Democrats that they defected because of a particular amendment that they just couldn't tolerate. So $20.5 billion in cuts, it's not even the number that I think we should focus on. It's the reforms in the program that I think are the most relevant in the approach that the House Ag Committee took. And I would also say that the House Ag Committee passed that bill on a 36-10 vote. That's very bipartisan demonstration on the part of the House Ag Committee. So I would have been very, very comfortable to have passed that bill as it was. Now, obviously, you know, we're going to let the House work its will. And in this case, I think it was a little too much, and we lost the support we needed and had to come back with a different approach. So I preferred the first approach, and unfortunately, we fell short.
Does anything get done? Because it's obviously the second approach. The sense is that's not going anywhere, at least in the Senate.
Well, I'm afraid that what could happen. I don't know that this will happen, and I haven't been told this for sure. We've taken the approach to decouple, which I didn't favor that approach. But the Farm Bill, or the commodity title of the Farm Bill, passed as it would have passed had we passed it. So not a whole lot of changes, with one exception. That was to repeal and replace the permanent law, the 1949 underlying default law. Beyond that, it's the same bill, other than there's no commodity title. So the idea is that, well, we'll pass a separate commodity title. Well, again, I don't know that we can pass a second, or a nutrition title rather. I don't know that we can pass a nutrition title in the time that we have. And if we don't, then we don't get any of the reforms that we set out in the original House bill.
Because it's an entitlement program, it
right.
stays at the funding level where it's at.
Exactly. So the reforms that we were looking at, we really may have lost those in kind of an overzealous overreach to do more. I thought we struck a very good balance in being fiscally responsible, but not losing all the support we needed to advance the bill. And look, everybody's got to vote their conscience, and they got to vote their district. I have a large number of SNAP beneficiaries in my district, but I also know that we can do a better job with it. And that's where I think the reforms came in. And I'd also say that Arkansas is not one of those states that has been prone to abuse these programs. These reforms were dealing with categorical eligibility and the LIHEAP, or what we call the Heat and Eat program. And Arkansas has really done a stellar job in comparison to these other states. And so Arkansas would probably have not seen little, if any, change at all to their program.
Congressman Rick Crawford, stick and stay. We'll come back with another block very soon. Right after the break, more with Congressman Rick Crawford alongside Roby Brock. I'm David Goins. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning on KARK.
I don't think it's going to be an easy conversation because they are very strong-willed. I think it's going to be important to us that we know that you're somewhere in a facility that looks after you, has compassion, has care, and you respect it. I mean, I'd love to look after them. I'd love to be able to take care of them, but I don't think I could. That'd be a wrong choice on my part.
Arkansas's skilled nursing and assisted living centers provide quality care for our seniors.
Farm Bureau helps protect its members in more ways than you might think. They've always been the voice of agriculture in Arkansas, working on behalf of folks like me when nobody else would. And Farm Bureau stands for the values that Arkansas families care about. They've protected my right to farm and make a living, which helps everybody who likes food on the table. You know what they say, Arkansas counts on agriculture, and agriculture counts on Farm Bureau.
The Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce and Associated Industries of Arkansas. The State Chamber AIA is the leading voice for business at the state capitol and serves as the primary business advocate on all issues affecting Arkansas employers. Our mission is to promote a pro-business, free enterprise agenda and prevent anti-business legislation, regulations, and rules. Now, more than ever, business matters. Learn more at arkansasstatechamber.com.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And welcome back to Capitol View. I'm Roby Brock.
And I'm David Goins. We rejoin 1st Congressional District Congressman Rick Crawford. Before the break, we were talking about the Farm Bill vote. And 2 weeks ago, we had Congressman Tom Cotton on here, and he really was kind of lauding the separation between the entitlement portion of that, the nutrition and the Farm Bill. But it sounds like from what you told us in the previous break, you weren't as enthusiastic. Fair to say?
Well, that's a fair assessment. I think what you have to look at, there were two things that had people concerned. One is the repeal and replace of the permanent law. The other is simply the leverage that we may lose by decoupling this, because the Farm Bill is really a misnomer, and I'm sure Tom would echo this. It really ought to be called a USDA reauthorization. What we're talking about here are programs that are administered by the USDA. Now, of this reauthorization, which is a 5-year program, about 75 to 80% is nutrition related, about 15% is farm production agriculture related, and then the balance being miscellaneous programs, conservation, and things like that. So it's a little bit unfair, I think, to call it a farm bill. However, in the broadest sense, we need these constituencies to work together on this, because our urban counterparts have no interest in production agriculture, and so our ag producers are really kind of on the short end of the stick if we don't work together on this deal, and so decoupling doesn't necessarily, what's the incentive for our urban counterparts to support production agriculture, commodity title. So I mean, we kind of got to use a little more approach that's a little more not necessarily bipartisan, but our divide is geographic in large part. So we really kind of hate to lose that dynamic, because it helps kind of drive the whole USDA reauthorization.
If something doesn't get done on SNAP reform or this entitlement reform, does Congressman Cotton and that section of the caucus, of the Republican caucus, should they be blamed for something not getting done?
No, I think that at the end of the day, everybody has to vote the way they think they should vote, and everybody's going to have to live with that. But I'm certainly not going to cast blame or cast aspersions on anybody or question their motives. I do think, though, that what we do need to do is to take another approach and get a different perspective on this. One of the things that's been a challenge to me is, when I first got there, recognized immediately that the divide that exists in Washington, yes, there is partisanship, but there's as much of a geographic divide. And I'm going to tell you, here we are in Little Rock, and Little Rock is a big city, and the best city to live in for small, mid-sized cities. It's great, but we are a small town, and this is a small state. It's a rural state, and we are outnumbered. There's only 4 of us in the House of Representatives, and you compare that. Heck, Houston is way bigger. Why does Houston care anything about what a rural state like Arkansas needs or wants? And the point I'm trying to make is that we need to bridge these gaps between urban demographics and rural demographics and try to come to some consensus that reflects the overall needs of the country.
Let's talk a little bit about consensus. If I can jump in here, I think we've got a poll from a recent Washington Post ABC News survey that was out. Shows that only 68% of it says that 68% of people think Congress should work across party lines with each other, and only 21% approve of the job that Congress is actually doing, compared to the president's job performance of 49%, roughly half. You serve in Congress. Do you feel like you've got about a 21% approval rating for the job that you're doing? And what do you think of that 68% wanting that compromise?
I think that there's 2 important things to glean from that. Number one, I think the country does expect us to work and get things done. Number 2, I think as an institution, people are frustrated with what they're seeing, and they want some accountability. They want us to be able to come home and say, we did X, Y, and Z, and we got it done. We're not going to get every single thing we wanted. Quite frankly, the commodity title was not exactly what I wanted. But ultimately, we need to move forward and advance these initiatives for the good of the country. So sometimes we got to take a little hit here and there. But the approval rating, everybody says they love their congressman, but they hate Congress, and you've heard that saying before. That's probably kind of the case. I mean, people in the coffee shops, walking around down the aisle in Walmart, they're all kinds of upset with what's going on in Washington. But they're telling me, keep fighting, and they keep, pat me on the back and send me into battle, and that's fine. That's what I'm supposed to do. But yeah, I would like to see a little more collegiality. I'd like for us to be able to get along and not have that divide that exists, and find the opportunity to at least identify the things that we can agree on and work on those. And the things that we can agree on, we'll debate about those, and we'll maybe work to try to find some consensus. But let's at least try to find the opportunities to work together.
We'll jump in at least on one more issue here in the last minute and a half or so. Didn't get as much maybe press. The vote that the House did on the NSA funding, whether or not to continue funding the program PRISM, that was obviously exposed by Edward Snowden. He's stuck in Russia. We're well aware of that. Not so much on Snowden himself, but your thought on why continue funding a program that apparently has done so much as far as looking at the privacy of individual Americans?
Well, I wouldn't say that doing away with that program is necessarily inappropriate. What I would say is that the nature of the bill or the amendment that was offered was inappropriate, in so much as this was more of a policy debate and less of a funding issue. This was a DOD appropriation. This wasn't about Intel reauthorization, and it wasn't about the authorizing committee having debate and authority over this issue. I'm all for oversight and making sure that we're not abridging the Fourth Amendment, and that was the argument that was made. But this was entirely the wrong forum for that, and it was the wrong bill. At the wrong time. I think that if we're going to correct this problem, we need to go back to the authorizing committee, we need to exercise great oversight, and we need to have hearings, and we need to have more than 10 minutes of debate to make a determination about this.
Wrong form, but did the NSA overreach with?
It's entirely possible, and that's one of the things that we're going to have to allow the Intel committee to make that determination. And quite frankly, I'm not in a position to make the comment because I'm not on that committee. And even if I were, I'm not sure that I could from a national security perspective. But certainly Americans are concerned about their constitutional rights being violated, and if that turns out to be the case, then we need to take the appropriate action. But I don't think an appropriations bill for DOD is the appropriate course.
First District Congressman Rick Crawford, thank you so much for being with us.
You bet.
Thank you, Congressman.
When we come back, the debate over state versus federal control moves to Arkansas schools. That plus the headlines from the week in Arkansas politics. I'm Roby Brock alongside David Goins. You have the Capitol View on Sunday morning on KARK.